and it's through the Texas AFT's.
Hello, welcome. I'm so excited to be here tonight with a great friend to educators, Joseph Trahan, who is running in House District 22 for the Texas House of Representatives. I'm Anthony Elmo. I'm the political director at Texas AFT. Thank you for giving us your attention tonight. We're excited to talk to a great pro-educator candidate. We've made a habit of doing these public education town halls the last couple of years, and we use it as an opportunity to talk to candidates about public education, about what is going on with educators in the world right now, what's going on with them in Texas, and to help talk through what the next legislative session will bring, and what this political season is bringing for educators, both at the school board level, state house races, the state board of education, all very important things. So we're very excited to have Joseph here with us tonight. Let me throw it to you, Joseph, to introduce yourself. Tell us about why you were crazy enough to run for the Texas House, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to speak to so many people this evening. As was stated, my name is Joseph Trahan. I was born and raised in Beaumont, Texas, which is in southeast Texas, more particular Jefferson County. I was born and raised into a family of public servants. My grandfather was a prominent civil rights leader of his time and the longest serving school board member at the Beaumont Independent School District, making a lot of strides in civil rights and equity in schools and in the city. In addition to that, my other set of grandparents were in law enforcement and the Beaumont Police Department. And so my family's always been ingrained in the community, and that seed was planted at a very early stage in my life. And so from the very moment that I was able to truly understand public policy, political parties and persuasions, I was hooked. And so I immediately decided, once upon graduating from the University of Texas, Austin, to come back to Beaumont and be involved in community organizing and political activism, where all of that ended up coming to a head when I was elected countywide as chairman of the Jefferson County Democratic Party, the youngest in our county and one of the youngest in the state of Texas. And from there, I definitely learned a great deal more about my community, building strong relationships. And that is what catapulted me into being a viable and well-known candidate to run for the state Rep District 22, which was held by Joe Deschantel for a number of years. And I'm running in particular because I think that my district really has a great concern about a number of issues, one of the most important being public education and the state of affairs that we find ourselves in here locally. And so I'm here to be an advocate, to be of use to public educators, and I anticipate in this runoff that I will be victorious.
I think you may have mentioned it in there, but I know you've mentioned it to me in the past that you do come from a family of educators. Tell us about that a little bit, because I know some of your family members have been educators. Where does that respect for public education come from in you?
I started all my life. My aunt is a counselor at Westbrook High School, and prior to that, she was an elementary school teacher. My mother was a high school educator. And of course, I have a great aunt, another step aunt. I mean, you name it. I have people who work in public education, in particular at the Beaumont Independent School District. And so from that, I knew at a very early age of the amount of commitment, both time as well as financial, to be a quality educator, to be ingrained among the students and the community. I saw that despite salary freezes, despite a lot of concerns related to the outcomes of student learning, infrastructure issues, you name it. They still held fast to their belief that they wanted to be of service to the community. They wanted to educate the next generation. And so that was just always something that was instilled within me. I've always had a great deal of respect for what I believe to be public servants and educators.
Absolutely. How if your constituents give you the responsibility to represent them, how do you foresee uplifting the voices of educators at the legislature? Because I think that's one thing we've heard from a lot of our members is they feel disrespected, they feel shut out by so much of the legislature because so much is extreme that goes on there. How do you kind of foresee lifting up your local educators to have their voices heard in the Capitol?
I've committed myself to make sure, first and foremost, in the district, to work closely with our local administrators at the Beaumont Independent School District, the Port Arthur Independent School District, Port Neches Groves, Nederland, to ensure that the perspectives of administrators as well as educators is taken into account because first and foremost, a legislator cannot be effective at advocating for increased resources, funding, and policy changes in the legislature if they don't first know how their individual constituents who work in that arena are being impacted by the decisions that have been made over the last several years in Texas. And so I want to make it clear that first and foremost, a lot of my impact is going to come and be driven from those that work on the ground here in my district. But moving forward from that, taking the lead from the Texas American Federation of Teachers, recognizing that we have to do our dead level best to advocate for increased funding, not only per pupil funding, but also increases in pay for educators, administrators, and staff members at all levels across the state of Texas. I'm well aware of a number of concerns, like the fact that over the last 10, 11 years, accounting for inflation, educators have seen a reduction in pay of about 4%. So we're behind when it comes to the expectation of secure living, quality of life, because, for example, in the early 2000s, I remember it very clearly, or mid 2000s, my aunt, who is a counselor, purchased a home, and she had the expectation that she was going to be able to live comfortably because of the steady increase in pay, the raises that took place every year. Well, when school districts across the country started freezing pay raises because the Texas legislature chose to disregard billions of dollars in funding that existed in the rainy day fund that could have been used to help educators during dire political times, they chose not to. And so I saw firsthand that whenever we don't take seriously cost of living adjustments, raises, and teacher pay that's on par with other parts of the country, because we're about $7,500 below the national average, that can be detrimental to the overall outlook of not only maintaining current teachers, but in individuals going to get an education and wanting to enter the field. A big thing that I also want to make clear is that in the legislature, I will not vote in support of efforts to use public dollars or public vouchers, if you will, to benefit private entities like private schools, which is something that Governor Abbott has talked about recently. And I also believe that we have to do a better job of adequately defending traditional public schools, because with the advent of charter programs, we have seen almost $4 billion reallocated from traditional public schools to those charter programs, which, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is going to impact not only pay, but also support for development of curriculum, for the quality of education, and the long-term goals of public schools. And so in a nutshell, as a legislator, I'm going to be someone that when I go to Austin, I'm taking the perspectives of those, as I mentioned, here in the district. I'm well aware of the fact that we have to improve pay. We have to improve teacher support. We have to make sure that we are empowering our staff members and educators to continue to remain in the profession. And I just want to be an ally overall. And I want to be someone that you can count on and know that it's not simply about lobbying dollars that's going to impact my perspective or my support for traditional public schools. It's going to be about the fact that I believe my constituents desire that, and it's something that I was brought up in because my standard of living, in large part, had to do with the strength of our public schools.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot in your answer that I think is very important to uplift and point to. Some of the statistics you pointed to about over the last decade, teachers having suffered basically a 4% pay cut across the board in Texas, I think is an alarming and horrifying statistic that I think lots of educators can feel in their pocketbook right now. We dropped in the Facebook chat a link to our report that we released with our partner, Every Texan. It was a great piece of research done to illustrate this point about educator wages, because to make the broader point, and I think you hit it in your last sentence that you said about how your standard of living that you've benefited from in your life has been directly related to the strength of the public schools that you attended, and that your mother taught at, that your family has taught at. And I think that says a lot about the Texas miracle, about the economic development that Texas has had is in large part due to the strength of its public school system. And I think the last thing we want to do is imperil that. And I'll kind of throw it back to you to expand a little bit about what you were just mentioning a moment ago. Governor Abbott has decided to play politics with education now in regards to an extreme voucher program, which Texas has never seen before and is not needed in the state. But Greg Abbott is talking about this now. How do you respond as a potential legislator? How do you deal with that? How do you respond to other legislators that'll say to you, we need a voucher program?
Well, from my perspective, it's clear that in order for us to improve educational outcomes, to make public education more equitable, we can't continue to pull from it. Oftentimes, individuals like Governor Abbott, Dan Patrick, and even existing legislators point to areas in which public education needs to be improved, but rather than addressing the specific issues that exist in public education, they pivot. And that's when you started seeing the proliferation of charter programs. That's when you're starting to see more talk about utilizing public funds to fund private entities who are not directly accountable to the taxpayer. Charter programs that are not managed by a democratically elected board, which answers to the public. These private entities, as well as these charter programs, even the charter programs that are considered public charter programs, can still be selective in the students that they accept. Traditional public schools do not have the ability to determine what students they teach and those that they do not. We know that overall, there has been a great deal of money, millions of dollars that have been poured into the state of Texas to try and influence legislators and how they approach public education. And so to me, the overall goal has been to disrupt traditional public education as we know it, to justify the creation of these spinoffs and to create different tiered public education systems, which to me verges on unconstitutional when you look at the Constitution and what it mandates for public schools to be efficient and to be free to the public. And so I would do my dead level best to work with Democrats and Republicans in the state house that do support public education to push back on efforts to use public funds and funnel them to entities and programs that are not accountable to the public. And I think that's something that regardless if someone considers themselves to be a Democrat or Republican, their constituents want to make sure that their tax dollars are being used effectively, efficiently, and they're being measured and being able to be tracked. And so I will advocate for a moratorium on the expansion of continued charter programs. I will be someone that votes against any effort to use public funds to support the privatization of public education and be an advocate for educators and staff members and students to push back against what we're seeing, which again, as I said, I always like to do in summation at each point to bring home, is to create a new education system that is going to create more cracks, that's going to cause more inequality, and ultimately does away with public education as we know it.
Absolutely. I think you definitely have an approach that makes sense and is representative of your constituents. I think the constituents in your area have benefited from their public schools. And I think any effort to drain them of resources has to be fought as hard as we possibly can. I want to kind of pivot a little bit, because one thing I always want to make sure to uplift and highlight is that educators get into this work for the kids. They don't get into it to get rich. They don't get into it for the acclaim or the stress that really being a teacher in Texas consists of. And these folks get in it for the love of children and the love of educating children. And right now, kids across this state are taking the STAR test. This is a high stakes testing regime that is tied to federal funding. It has been expanded in Texas. It's now tied in some ways to educator pay. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about the STAR test? What are you hearing from your friends that are parents in Beaumont? What are you hearing from your friends that are educators in Beaumont about the test, about how they're feeling about this high stakes testing right now?
A great level of frustration. We all recognize that it is important to be able to measure student outcomes to ensure that school districts are performing well and doing justice by taxpayers in the future generations. But with that in mind, these high stakes testing does not take into consideration a number of circumstances that exist in public education. To me, performance shouldn't be tied to a single test. There are a number of educators who express frustration because not only are you having to teach students to a test, but you're also trying to cultivate them to be productive citizens of society. And so with the stress of trying to ensure, because again, performance is so strongly tied to the standardized statewide tests, it results in gaps. We know that there are a number of children in the public education system that are experiencing trauma. Their own home lives put them at a disadvantage. Many of them may come from single parent households, or they are not even being raised by a parent to begin with, or their parents are working multiple jobs, and they're having to deal with all the struggles that arise from socioeconomic circumstances that are out of their control. That's just by virtue of birth. And so with that in mind, you have educators who are having to deal with a number of mental health issues, behavior-related struggles. And to me, whenever we're looking at standardized tests, it does not take into consideration a holistic approach to education, being able to see what are the circumstances that exist in a school district and how are educators able to improve upon that through progress in their grades, through progress in their academic accomplishments or academic participation. And so whenever you have such high stakes testing, you have a lot of disproportionate outcomes because not all school districts are created equally in terms of funding. We know that public schools are predominantly funded by property taxes, and some communities are more affluent than others. And as a consequence, pay rates are lower in some areas. You have more openings that exist because of frustration with education. So students have a lot of problems that they face as well as educators. And some students are good test takers. Others may not be. Some students perform better in school with particular fields of study, but they may just not do as well on one test. And for one test to dictate the success of a student whenever they are being educated and participating year-round, I think is unacceptable. We know that right now as it exists, in high school, you can have 5 STAR tests. And if you pass 3 and there's 2 that you may not pass, there are, the individual graduation committees and empowering people to who actually work with these students to make considerations and to work with them. And I think that's what we have to look at and support and realize that high stakes testing causes too much stress. It does not give a great view overall of the quality of education that a student receives, the circumstances surrounding their education, or the quality of their teacher. And I think it does a disservice, as well as the A through F rating system, which I think is overly simplistic and has caused a lot of problems across the state of Texas.
Absolutely. I think we hear a lot from our members about their frustration with high stakes testing, especially the ties to educator pay. That is definitely problematic. I think you hit on a number of important points and places where there needs to be reform in the next legislature, especially around A to F rankings and things like that. So I think that's very key. I think another piece to this puzzle that I think is continuing to be an issue, and we're hearing it consistently from our members, is the lack of respect for their profession in a number of different avenues. One is that they don't feel like they're paid for the value they contribute. That's one piece. Another piece is they don't feel like they are paid for the work that they do, especially with new state mandates around reading academies and additional instruction and things like that. We hear from retirees that there hasn't been a COLA to keep up with the rate of inflation. So how do you deal with this matter in the next legislature that is resulting in a severe retention crisis? Like it's not only that teachers are unhappy, it's that they are so unhappy they are leaving the profession in droves, and retiring and or considering it, moving to other states, moving to other places that, moving to other professions entirely. So, what are your thoughts about that? How do you deal with this impending teacher, and really be even beyond teacher, school employee, retention crisis?
I think that the coronavirus pandemic uh, didn't so much change the way in which educators have felt for many years, but it certainly shined a light to the community at large about the very real issues that exist in today's public education system. And going into the next legislative session, we know that public education is going to be one of the a hot button issue. It's something that the Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan, has even talked about, who also who would share Jefferson County with me. That has indicated that that's going to be something that's high on the agenda. And so we know going in, there's going to be a number of bills, policy recommendations that are going to take place. We know a number of legislators are going to file uh, legislation that's either in support of what the Texas American Federation of Teachers and Public Educators overall are pushing for. And there's going to be some that are going to be pushing for what charter school programs and charter school packs are pushing for. And so there's always going to be that tension. But what we have to remain focused on is the fact that big money doesn't necessarily do an effective job at shutting up, if you will, the masses. And so educators for years, and not just educators, but paraprofessionals, individuals who are working at the district level that may not be directly educating students, but work around the realm of education, have all expressed frustration with the increased levels of regulation and expectations that have been piled on year after year without any real solutions or acknowledgments of the complaints that were lodged in the school years prior. And so that makes for a Molotov cocktail of frustration, dissent, and apathy towards the state legislators' ability to effectively advocate for the public. And so for me, for example, you mentioned retirees. I do agree that there should be a cost of living adjustment that's tied to inflation. We should honor those who have committed decades of their lives to educating our students, who are committing that public service. And so I will vote in support of cost of living adjustments, while at the same time voting against any efforts to privatize the retiree program that exists today. I think it should continue to be a public pension. I do believe that we have to advocate for legislation and policies that increase the minimum wage for a number of our paraprofessionals, cafeteria workers, maintenance staff, and the like. I think that we need to increase teacher pay. And a lot of people wonder, well, where are we going to get all this money? Well, it has to do with what we prioritize in the budget. And we know that there are billions upon billions of dollars in that exist today because legislators expected and economists expected for us to be in a worse budgetary strength than we are. And the economy ended up improving. And so there are billions of dollars in funds that can be allocated to go towards public education, in addition to what is typical in this next legislative session. And I want to make it clear that although I intend to be in Austin and we're going to be focused on doing the people's work, I also want to stay connected to my constituents here every step of the way to talk about what it is that I'm hearing coming out of committees. What is it that seems to be winning the day? And how does that translate over to their direct lives, their day-to-day living, the way in which they operate as educators, as staff members in public school districts? And so you have to address the issues head on, work diligently in good faith with Democrats and Republicans. And if you can't win everything, at least try to push for specific hot button issues and find ways in which we can get more people to our side. And I think by showing that if we empower educators, if we strengthen the public education system, if we try and tackle symptoms, if we try to tackle root causes rather than symptoms long term, that's a better investment for communities. And so again, I can't push enough that yes, teacher pay is important, the cost of living adjustment is important, adequately funding education in school districts by increasing per pupil funding is important. But so is addressing issues related to behavior, mental health concerns. And a community schools approach is something that I really readily identify with, and making sure that we're bringing community organizations as well as government together to have a holistic approach to education, to stabilize a child, to make sure that they have the basic needs met so that they can be effective in the classroom and can be positive contributors to society.
I think you talked about something really important there that I want to highlight, that the people pushing for alternative education systems in Texas are motivated by profit in many ways. The people who are supporting Governor Abbott, his donors, are in favor of a voucher scheme for a lot of different reasons, and they are pushing him to do that. The same thing is happening in state house races and school board races, where you have rich PACs led by out-of-state donors who are often millionaires and billionaires entering into state house and state board of education races. Have you seen that starting to happen in your race at all, Joseph?
Beyond a shadow of a doubt. It began in the primary, and it's becoming more prominent in the runoff. There are thousands, I would imagine tens of thousands of dollars that are being poured into this district race in support of my opponent, who has publicly and readily aligned himself with charter programs, and I think their agenda, which to me is ultimately to dismantle public education as we know it today. There's been remarks made that traditional public schools and public charter programs can exist in harmony. And I find that to be a fallacy, because if you have billions of dollars that are being pulled away from public education, traditional public schools, educators that are leaving the profession, systemic issues continuing to arise, we're not, obviously, the system as it exists today, these charter entities, these programs that are proliferating, is not improving the state of affairs of public education, but worsening it, because you're causing division, disconnects, budgetary issues. And so, yes, overall, there have been a great deal of money through phone calls, mail outs, TV advertisements to discredit me and to try to impugn my character, because I have readily chosen not to accept their money and not to participate in what I believe is an ultimate scheme to privatize public education.
Absolutely.
Because you have to think and connect the dots. Why would these large PACs be investing so much money? They know that overnight, we all know that in Texas education, charter programs are public charter programs. But long term, what I believe, are trying to do is flip enough state legislators to, when they can get a majority of support, to start walking into the idea of privatizing more of public education. And I think we saw a strong indicator of that with Governor Greg Abbott just recently, within the last week or so, talking about pivoting public dollars to private entities.
Absolutely. This is, I think, something folks should really kind of follow the money on, look at the charter schools now pack and look at who their donors are. It's the Walton family. It's Reed Hastings, who runs Netflix. It's out of state billionaires trying to change the public education system in Texas. And we should find that unacceptable. And candidates and elected officials should not take money from organizations like that, that are bent on doing something destructive to the state of Texas, and to our educators, to parents, and to the kids we all love and support. I have 3 kids in our public school system right here in Texas. So, Joseph, I'm so appreciative of this time that we got to spend together today. Thank you for all your thoughts on public education. Earlier, we sent you our respect pledge, which we are asking people around the state of Texas to sign in support. And could you either show it or talk about that? It's about signing the. If you didn't print it out, that's okay. But you can talk a little bit
Well,
about.
I had
your,
some of it printed out. I submitted it
Thank
prior
you.
to meeting today, and in it, as you can see, it has respect us, and it's a pledge that you make to stand with public educators, that you respect all of the individuals who work within public education. And just a few things that I think are important to note is that Texas ranks 45th in the country for per student funding. We are among the bottom of the barrel when it comes to a number of metrics compared to other states around or other states in the United States. And we know that the most effective way that we can promote change and also to strengthen public education is through numbers. And so constituents have a lot of influence over their individual legislators. And so people that don't only live in my district of 22, but across the state of Texas. And I think that it's a really great thing to make your voice heard by signing the pledge. It's a virtual signature, and you select different things you would like to participate in and certain statements that you agree with. And then that can be used to bolster the idea that there is more physical support for traditional public schools. And I think that's the best way through grassroots organizing that we could combat dark money as well as super PACs that try to influence the outcomes of elections across the United States, especially here in Jefferson County.
That's absolutely right. I think the Texas legislature will be improved by your leadership. Texas AFT is wholeheartedly endorsing you. We support your run. We think you're the right choice for educators and parents in your district. We hope folks will get out there and vote. The first day of early voting is May 16th. That is Monday. You will get a chance to vote. If you are an absentee voter and you haven't sent in your ballot yet, now's a good time to do that. Make sure you vote by mail. And if you have a chance to early vote, there's no reason not to. It's easy. You don't have to wait in line. Go early vote for Joseph and all the other great AFT candidates around the state. There are great candidates up and down the ballot. So, Joseph, why don't you close us out with a last word just about your campaign, about how folks might be able to help you, and what you're going to be doing in the home stretch.
Definitely. Well, thanks again to everyone for hearing me out and expressing their support all across the district. I am someone who believes that among the top 3 priorities among my constituency is public education, along with flooding and drainage, infrastructure, and healthcare. And many of those things are intertwined and they impact one another. I am someone who believes in the importance of public service. I chose to return home in order to be of service to my community. I could be anywhere in the world making a lot more money, but I chose to be back here in my hometown to continue my family's legacy of service and to give young people a reason to remain in our community and to be proud of our community. I am looking forward to meeting many of you if I haven't already. As was stated, early voting is May 16th through the 20th. That's 5 days of early voting, which is a lot shorter than what we had in the primary. And your absolute final opportunity, if you're not able to vote early, is May 24th. Polls are open 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. If you'd like to learn more about me, you can go to josephtrahan.com, where you can see more of my policy platforms, my biography, and ways to get in contact with me, as well as to donate.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're really appreciative of your time tonight. We're going to be working hard for you. You're also joining us next week again for our texting mixer. We
Yeah.
have a texting mixer happening where we invite all of our member activists from around the state to come together and send text messages to voters on behalf of our endorsed candidates. So we will have you. We will have Ruben Cortez, who's running in the Valley. We will have Dr. Suleiman Lalani, who is running in Fort Bend. And we will have Benton Jones, who is running in Dallas. All great pro-educator, pro-public education candidates that we want to support. So again, thank you, Joseph. We'll see you next week. We're going to be working hard for you, and hopefully we'll have some good results come the 24th. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you all.